Hello everyone! In this tutorial here I'm going to show you how to deal with noise. What I'm speaking about is this. If I go and render preview in Blender, you can see that there are a lot of white dots here and there in the entire frame. This is a common issue of all 3D software, is always going to be there. So I'm going to show you how to deal with this, how to fix it, how to get a perfectly clean render. Actually, there are a lot of tutorials about this topic on YouTube, but I think that at this point I got my very personal way of dealing with noise, so I thought I would share this tutorial with you all. Let's see what can we do. I have set up this very simple scene. There is just one light source, that is this point light here. I don't know if you can see it. Probably because of the compression of YouTube, you probably don't see necessarily the noise. I hope yes, but by the way, I'm going to explain you all the things that you need to know, even if you don't necessarily see the amount of noise that I see in this render. So the first thing that comes to your mind, of course, is going to be to just go here and activate the denoiser, right? Also for the render, but you have to know that this is really not the best way for fixing the noise in your renders. First of all, because this quick function here, yeah, in one side is gonna delete the noise, you can see that it's perfectly clean, but also has the cost of eating out all the little details that you might have in your textures. Also, it's not very accurate. In fact, you probably see a clean render only because you are looking at a still image. But when you render the finished animation, you probably have waited days and you just watch for the first time your animation just to notice that there are very bad surprises like artifacts or splotchy looking pixels, giant cubes everywhere just because of the denoiser. So instead of just activating the denoiser from here, I'm going to show you better ways of managing the noise. Eventually at the end we're going to use the denoiser, but in a very controlled way. So let's turn the denoiser off for both the viewport and the render. The other pretty obvious thing that would come to your mind is, just increase the max samples of the render to 6000 and whatever, because maybe you have a powerful computer and that's not necessarily gonna fix the noise. In fact, you can see that the render is going on and I still have a noisy render. So I'm going to suppose instead that we want to render with the lowest amount of samples possible, 64. Also for the render, 64. This way we can speed up the render times by a lot. So the first thing that I would suggest you to do is notice this noise threshold value. I'm going to lower this to 0.01, which is already going to give a little bit of a better dealing with the noise. Just ensure that this same value is also for the render setting, so 0.01 here. Then the next setting that is going to have a huge impact in the amount of noise is down here under light paths. There is this voice here, clamping. The light clamping is really important for deleting the noise from your renders. So just to show you, I'm going to set both of this value to 0.5, let's say, just to show you the difference. Actually, let's start very low, 0.01 and 0.01 also for the indirect. I'm going to increase progressively these two values just to show you what they mean. So the direct light clamping, if I increase it progressively, very slowly, you can see that it's at the same time having an influence in the amount of brightness that you have in the scene and also is managing noise. Basically, the clamping is putting a limitation of the maximum brightness that any pixel in your render can have. So the direct light clamping is influencing the areas that are directly hit by the light. So in this case, I have my light here. Let's suppose that is hitting this part of the cat. This part is affected by direct light. Instead, indirect light clamping is affecting the areas that are affected indirectly by the light source. For example, I can suppose that this entire area is affected by the indirect lighting because the light cannot really arrive there directly because it's blocked by some other objects. Probably the light is like going here and then bouncing here and then bouncing here and finally arriving in this area here. So this is why it's called indirect lighting, because the light source is not hitting directly this surface but indirectly. So this indirect light setting is going to have an influence on those areas. And you are going to want to increase or decrease this value very slowly, very gradually. If you hold shift, you can increase or decrease very gradually any setting in Blender like this. You're going to want to find the best compromise, the point in which you start losing the brightness of your object, basically. Now I'm going to adjust the direct lighting. So I can go pretty higher with the direct, because usually the noise is not really coming from the direct light, but from the indirect. So I'm gonna stay a little bit higher from this. You're gonna have to observe these two settings basing on your specific scene. So you can see that with these settings here, without using any denoiser, my 3D scene is already pretty clean. Let's give the time for the samples to load, of course, and at the end of the loading, now you can see that I was able to clean up completely this noisy render without using any denoiser, which means that I am not sacrificing the textures that has a lot of details like this one here. But there is one more thing to do. I'm gonna go here in the render properties, advanced, activate this icon here that you see under seed, because this basically animates the noise that you have in your animation. If you press play, you can play the animation and you can have a preview of what I mean. You can see the noise pattern is not anymore stationary, is moving, we can say. Look at that. If I turn this off, I play the animation again, you can see that before was a stationary pattern, which is really horrible to see. I see many videos on YouTube having this issue, which is really horrible to see in any 3D render. Instead, since that we are always going to have a little bit of noise, at least make it realistic. So just activate this advanced option under the seed. So here we go. So apparently when you play the animation from the viewport, it's going to be very noisy, but it's not going to be like that when you render. In fact, if you stop the animation, you can see the sample count will increase finally, and you can see the clean render. The thing is that when you play the animation in Blender, Blender doesn't have the time to load 64 samples. So you're just watching the animation with one sample, basically. That's why you see a lot of noise. So don't worry about that. Just pause the animation and observe the samples increasing here. Speaking about the samples, I set 64 just because most computers in the world are probably medium workstation, pretty weak, so 64 is the minimum necessary for a decent render. But generally speaking, I would suggest always to go with 128, is probably one of the best compromises between render times and quality. So do the same for the render, 128. Now, this is already looking pretty okay and doesn't need any denoising. There are most frustrating situations that can happen if you have, for example, an explosion, a fire, or if you are exaggerating with the power of your lights in scene. So for any light source that you have in your scene, just don't exaggerate with the light power. So if you go here and set this on 50,000, of course, there is no solution to this. This render is always gonna be noisy. Even if you put 2000 samples, whatever, when you watch the animation at the end, is for sure gonna be very weird. So, in general, remember to don't exaggerate with the power of your light sources. For a point light, maybe a power of 1500 is gonna be alright. For a sunlight, the power should never be higher than 10. In fact, you can see that with 1500 it's going to be overexposed all the way, and by the way producing a lot of noise. With a sunlight, you are going to want to stay lower than 10. If I write this manually here, you can see that Blender is actually suggesting to you to don't exaggerate with the sun power. In fact, if you drag this number and try to go higher than 10, you can see that it's limited. You cannot go higher than 10 unless you directly write some higher number. So there is a reason for that, and the reason is because it produces a lot of noise and also because it's not realistic. So for this example, I'm going to stay on point light, and let's go back to 1500 power. Here we go. So this is already okay, and I would be so happy to just render this as it is, because it's pretty clean. It's actually almost perfect. I don't see any particularly disturbing noise. So I will set up my format and just export the image sequence as it is from here. Now, let's see more complicated cases. For example, if you have some glossy material or some glass materials, those are terrible because they produce a lot of noise. So let's suppose that this cat is made of glass. I go here in the materials, I delete this material here, I create a new material and surface, and I'm going to replace this with a glass BSDF. Yes, I'm going to decrease the roughness a little bit. Here we go, just something like this. So maybe I'm gonna do also this monument here made of glass. Let's see, I'm gonna delete this, I'm gonna add the material is gonna be the glass. So we have two monuments made of glass. There are two things that I notice immediately. The first is that these glasses are pretty dark for some reason. They are not supposed to be this dark. They don't look like glass at all. The simple reason is because we are using light clamping. So let's check all the way down here. If I increase the indirect light clamping, I will fix this dark looking of the glass, because there is a lot of indirect light coming inside the glass. But this has a cost. Look at that. I increase progressively the indirect light clamping, and I'm recovering somehow the brightness of the glass, you can see. But this is introducing again all those noise that I didn't want in my render, especially in the shadows areas. You can see a lot of noise. Glasses and glossy materials, they are terrible. They are very good at producing noise in your renders. So what we do in these cases? Well, let's first of all give the time to the samples to load so we can see how it's gonna be in the final look. Okay, so it has loaded 128 samples, and still it's a little bit noisy in the shadows area, like here. I see a lot of noise here, and here too. So in this case, if you have glassy and glossy materials, first of all, you're going to want to play a little bit with the filter glossy function that is here. I'm going to set this very low, like 0.01, but this doesn't really fix the issue for us. It's trying to fix these reflections passing through the glass and making this less noisy, but still, you are still going to have the noise in the shadows area. So this is not enough. Instead, what we're going to do in this case is finally to use the denoiser, but in a very specific way. So the way that I am going to use for exporting this with the denoiser, but in a controlled way, you're going to want to activate denoising from here and here as well, for the viewport and the render basically. Then I'm going to change the options, maybe open, image, denoise, whatever. Use GPU, yeah, why not? By the way, this is not very important for the options, because we are going to control this denoising from the compositor. Maybe we can use open image denoise as well here. Albedo and normal, accurate, here we go. So we have the denoising, but this is, again, you cannot call it a day and just render the scene as it is, because this is, I don't know if you noticed, but it's looking completely washed out. It's too flat. It's here that people will say, yeah, you have made a 3D render, but it has a little bit of a cartoonish looking. I don't know how to explain it. This is because of the denoising that is flattening everything in your render. So I'm going to do this instead. Leave this denoising active. I'm going to go in the compositor, and first of all, for the compositor to work, we're going to have to press F12 to launch a render, or you can go here, render and render image, because the compositor needs a base render for actually working. So here we have a frame. Let's wait for this to finish. Okay, we have made a render. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into compositor, activate use nodes. Now for the next part, we're going to need to use the node wrangler add-on. So edit preferences, add-ons, and search for activate the node wrangler, so that this way we can simply select this node here and press Ctrl Shift and click it again, so that finally we can see a preview of our compositing, of what we are doing. Alt V for zooming in or out. All right, first of all, I need more options here for controlling how the denoising is operating in my render. So I'm going to do this. Let's go here in this side panel here, view layer. I'm going to activate denoising data. And notice that we have more options here. And notice also another thing, this noisy image option is very important. And this is available only if you activate the denoise also from here. Look at that, I turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. So this is kind of weird because we are using the denoiser here and also in the compositor, but leave it as it is because we're gonna need it. So what we're gonna do? Well, the idea is this. We are gonna export two renders at the same time. One with the denoiser and one without the denoiser. The sense of this is that in post-production you can compare the two renders and first of all decide which one looks better and works better for you. If the denoised one is looking good, doesn't have any artifacts deriving from the denoising, you are good to go. Instead, if you notice artifacts caused by the denoising, you still have the option to use the render without denoising and manage the denoising with that in post-production. And you can do that in any video editing software like DaVinci, whatever. So this way you have an option. Instead of just activating the denoiser, render as it is and call it a day and waiting for 3 days for your render to finish. And then when you watch it, you had the surprise that is full of splotchy areas and giant pixels that basically destroy the good looking of your render. So how are we gonna do it? Well, first of all, let's delete all of this. Press Shift A and search for file output, this node here. So ensure that this is selected. I'm gonna press in. Go under, in the right here, I'm gonna go under node, file format, I'm gonna choose OpenEXR, RGB alpha, float half, codec DVU-AA. These are my favorite settings for managing better any render, but just to show you what I mean very quickly, I'm going to show you just an example with JPEG format. So just for this tutorial, I'm going to use JPEG to show you the difference between the two renders very quickly, alright? So don't do it, never in JPEG. So let's see. So in this file output, we are going to have the original render with the denoiser applied. I'm going to duplicate this node here, Shift D, so that it has already all the options that we need. So this file output here is going to be with the denoiser already applied. So I'm going to choose where to save it by clicking on this icon here, make a folder, and here I'm going to choose my name. It's going to be the denoised version, accept. With the same node selected, I'm going to also write here the same name, so denoised version. And then I'm going to select this node finally. I'm going to choose where to save it again. Same folder that we used before, but I'm going to call it noisy version. This is the original render without any denoiser. And I'm going to put the same name with this node selected. I'm going to put the same name here, so noisy version. Now we also need a denoiser node. So Shift A and search for denoise. And we're going to do this. First of all, we can disconnect this line from here. I'm going to connect instead the noisy image directly in here, but I'm going to put the denoise node in the middle of this line. Here we go. Then I'm going to connect also the denoising normal to the normal output, which is here. Denoising albedo connected to the albedo, of course. And then for this node here, we're going to use only the noisy image option. So take it from here and connect it directly in here, so that this is going to be the noisy render and this is going to be the denoised render. So maybe save the project now, because I don't know what's going to happen. The last thing that I want you to do is this. Go here, output, and delete anything that is written here under the output panel. This is hopefully gonna avoid useless additional renders, but let's see how it goes. Now let me check the samples that I choose. 128, yeah, everything is all right. So let's try. I launch my render animation this time. So not render image, but render animation. Let's observe what happens during the render. So you can see a first issue is that Blender has stopped the render because it says render error permission denied. This is something that happens always to me when we try to render from the compositor and eventually deleting something from here. So the easiest fix for that is just close Blender, restart Blender, but right click on the icon and choose run as administrator, whatever. Press yes on the pop-up window that appears. I'm gonna reopen my project. All right, and now we are free to finally launch the render. So render animation. Here we go. Blender is rendering, and this time is not stopping because we unlocked Blender for, you know, administrator permissions, so whatever. So what is happening right now is that Blender is rendering two different renders at the same time. And you can observe it in the Explorer. There is one folder for the denoised version that has its own image sequence. And then there is the noisy version that actually has the noise. Look at that. We can open one frame just to observe. You can see the one frame with the noise and another frame from this folder without the noise. So basically in post-production we can manage this choice. We can choose which one to use, or we can eventually combine them together depending on what we need, in which parts we need one or the other. It's very interesting as an approach for managing the noise and at the same time to preserve all these little details that we want to see in the render. Alright, I'm gonna just wait for this render to finish, I guess, and then I'm gonna make the comparison and show to you what I actually do in post-production. Again, just in case I want to repeat that we are rendering in JPEG format, PNG, whatever, but you should never do that, right? It's just for having a quick preview of the files when we watch them in Explorer, just to explain to you very quickly, you know. Alright, I'm gonna let this render to finish and see what happens. Alright, my render is finished. So in this version, zooming in just to show you the amount of noise that we have. And in this version, you can see the denoiser acting, cleaning up the noise. So we're gonna see now this animation, how it looks, and we're gonna combine them in post-process. I'm gonna use After Effects, but you don't have to worry. You can use any video editing software like DaVinci or Premiere Pro, wherever you prefer, Final Cut. The process is exactly the same in all softwares. Just understand the principle at the base. So first of all, I'm going to import my render sequence. Speaking of which, I actually want to make you notice one thing. So when you render from the compositing in Blender, what is happening is that it makes you the render that you asked for, but it also makes some trash files that you immediately want to delete. Just go in the folder in which you have actually Blender, the software itself. So this one here, Blender 4.2 in this case. And you can see that in this folder, I have a version of my render that I didn't ask for. So just take all of these frames and delete them completely because they are not supposed to be here. I never understood why this is a thing. It asks for a confirmation for doing it, so just confirm. Yeah, and this is probably related to why Blender was refusing to render before, for which we had to activate the administrator privilege or whatever. So, by the way, just be aware of that, because maybe you have a folder in your computer that is full of renders and you don't even know about it. So, post-production here. I'm going to import first the noisy version, the version with noise. I'm going to select the first frame, check this sequence, all right, and import. All right, I have my first layer. I'm going to import also the version, denoised version. Here we go. I'm going to select the first one, check the sequence option, import. All right, right click and check that the frame per second is correct. So set main. I'm going to set this on 24 frames per second, like it's supposed to be. I'm going to do the same for the other one. Right click, set main, 24 frames per second. All right, so I'm going to show you two ways, two solutions for dealing with the noise in post-production. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is easier. I'm going to create a sequence that is composed only with the noisy version. So I drag and drop it here. I have a new sequence. This is the version with noise. If I zoom in, probably you're going to see it. Hopefully the compression of YouTube is not hiding this noise, but I see a huge amount of noise here. You can see. So what you can do is to apply a denoiser in post-production. So I search for denoiser. I drag and drop this effect in my layer, and this way I have all these controls. I can decide how much strong is going to be this effect. So you can see that with these options in post-production is much more convenient to dealing with noise in your renders, rather than Blender that just gives you the option to activate or turn off the denoiser, which doesn't give you the control that you need, because sometimes it's just too much, the denoising. You just want to hide this noise a little bit, but without exaggerating. Enhancement, maybe. Motion estimation, yeah, use GPU. This makes everything much faster if you can use it. So this is already a solution. Eventually what you can do, you notice that noise happens not in the entire frame, but just in some areas, especially in some shadows area, mid-tones or shadows areas. So what you can do to preserve the original look and all the fine details of your texture in the entire frame, what you can do is to apply the denoiser only in specific areas that need the denoiser. Doing that in After Effects is very easy. Just go up here and select this tool, the pen tool, for creating a mask basically, or you can even create a mask, a circular mask if you want. Now I'm gonna just use the pen. So if you just draw a mask, you can focus the denoiser only in that specific area, which is much more convenient than just applying the denoiser in the entire frame. So once you have the mask, I'm gonna go here in the timeline, I'm gonna expand this, and basically to apply the mask in the effect that you want. It's pretty unintuitive, so you just go here, expand this layer, find the effect here in the list, denoiser, compositing options, and you just click on this plus button, and this is gonna introduce the mask only for this effect instead of affecting the opacity of the entire layer. So what is happening now is that the denoising is happening only in the area inside the mask, not outside. We're also going to want to blur this mask a little bit, so you can do it from the mask options, which are here, mask, this mask here, blur mask. I'm going to increase this value a little bit, just so that the borders are not sharp. There's more like a progressive switching between the area with the denoiser and the external area basically. So I see that this is already a little bit better, but maybe we can make another mask for this shadow area here. So you can see this is the concept. You basically apply the denoiser only in the specific areas that you need. By the way, if you make multiple masks, you're going to have to recall that mask in the effect as well. So denoiser here in the timeline of this layer here. Denoiser, compositing options, click again on this plus button. Here we go, and now it's using 2 masks. We're gonna remember also to blur this mask as well. So mask 2, blur mask, and maybe 150, something like that. So hopefully you can see properly, but look at this area here. So this is without, which means a lot of noise, and this is with the denoiser. Without, with, without, with. It's kind of helping a little bit, but this denoiser is, we can say, a little bit limited. Let's see, I'm gonna play the animation. This is not bad really, but if you still want more, you can do another solution, and that's why I rendered 2 versions of my 3D scene. So look at that, I'm gonna remake this scene from scratches. I'm gonna close this without even saving. I'm gonna re-import my 2 sequences, one with the denoiser, one without the denoiser. I'm gonna create a new sequence again. First, I imported noisy version. I add on top the denoised version, which is this one. I add it on top. What we're gonna do is this. We said that the version with the denoiser active is too much flat, is too much washed out, looks like cartoon. We don't want the denoiser to be applied in the entire frame, just in specific areas. So we can mask specific areas of this layer. So let's do this. Let's for now turn off the visibility of this layer here, the noisy version. So we are looking only at the version with the denoiser activated in Blender. Just make a mask in this shadow area and maybe another one here. Maybe I'm gonna move this mask where I need. We can change the shape, control, and click here to change it. And then we can make another mask on the rooftop, which I remember was pretty noisy. So these are the 3 areas that are gonna be visible for the version of the video with denoiser already active. Let's blur out these 3 masks already. So here. So once you combine this with the other render, which is this one, look at that. I activate the visibility of this one, and this is what I mean. We have combined together the 2 renders, and this is the result. Look at that. Yeah, probably it's going faster than expected because I didn't change the FPS, but look at that. What is happening is that we are looking at the original render, and just in some specific areas like the shadows here and here and here, we have used the denoised version. This way, we have 2 advantages. First, we have cleaned up completely the shadows areas, and at the same time, we have preserved all these little details that we need to have in these textures, like here, for example, that a denoiser would have completely deleted. Now, you probably have a camera movement, so the masks need to be animated. Animating masks in After Effects is very easy. So this mask here, for example, I want to animate it, and so I activate this icon here, which you can see that now this mask is available for putting keyframes. For example, if I go here and I change the shape, like I'm moving this mask, I can even completely change the shape as I want, like this or this, expanding here like this. You can see that I have created a new keyframe for this specific mask that now is animating. And this is perfect for scenes in which the camera is moving. This is something that I do actually quite a lot because I need the denoiser, especially with scenes that has like volumes or smokes. I do a lot of buildings, destructions and simulations with smokes, so I always have to deal with noise. But I don't want the denoiser to act in the entire frame, just in some specific areas. And this is how I deal with it. So to summarize, in any software that you use for video editing, you put the version with noise at the base, and on top of that, just like the list of layers in Photoshop. On top of that, you put the version with the denoiser activated already in Blender, and then you simply mask the parts that you want to see without noise, like this. Just for you to know, there are actually other ways for dealing with noise, which are more complicated, definitely not intuitive, and I would not recommend that. In fact, I'm not gonna show you, but just for you to know if you want to investigate on YouTube, there are ways in Blender for exporting all passes, like 16 passes when you export a render, but that's gonna be very heavy for your memory, for your computer. I'm not gonna do that. Basically, it requires more complicated operations, and basically the idea is to export every single pass of the render and then go to denoise only the specific pass that is responsible for the noise to happen. But honestly, I think that is a waste of time. It requires a lot of sources from your computer, so I'm not going to show you. I don't recommend you to do that. It requires also the EXR multi-layer version, which is not really intuitive to handle. So I would recommend that only if you are a professional working in a production. That's the thing. Alright, so noise dealing. Here is how I do it. I see you in the next video. Bye.